Media Broadcasting Center.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with the new JFK show with Gary King and Don Fox and possibly others, but Gary isn't here. So Don, how are you doing, my friend?
Hey, pretty good. How you doing, Jim?
Good.
Got my
what's the latest? What have you been up to, my friend?
well, I got my Black Op Radio T-shirt on tonight.
I love it.
Well, I figure, okay, I heard their show a couple weeks ago, and every once in a while Len does do some good stuff, so we should be fair in our judgment of Black Ops. So he was playing the Gerald Ford testimony at the House Select Committee on Assassinations back in 78, I believe it was, September 78.
Yes. They held their hearings in 77, 78, and then published a final report in 79.
Yeah, so we'll have a few clips here tonight from Gerald Ford's testimony. So it's hard to pick on Len for that. Now, we've got some other stuff that we'll be bringing up in future shows. But for this week, we won't be putting the boots to Len Osanic. So,
do we think that Gary is actually here? I think that's his scenario, but he's missing. His countenance is missing.
He called me about 5 minutes before the show, and he said he could not get on the internet, so he's got to call his provider. So,
Well, does Chance has these audio clips, right?
I believe that he should, yeah.
So, should we go ahead and proceed by discussing them? Do you want to say more by way of background?
Yeah, let me see here. I had a nice little summary typed up. I believe the first one is, let me just make sure here. Yeah, Gary had everything teed up, ready to go, and then, my internet doesn't work. What are you doing, Gary? I mean, should have been working on that an hour ago.
Can't be a pure coincidence.
Well, you never know. I mean,
sometimes it's incompetence rather than conspiracy.
See, that is true. We've seen that. That's one thing. My provider here, I've only been down twice in 10 years, and it's only been for like a total of maybe 3-4 hours out of the whole time. So I've been lucky in that respect. Now, yeah, is Chance still there? Okay. Yeah. Did you get those clips? It should say like Ford 1, 2, and 3. You got 1 and 2. Okay. All right. Well, I tell you what. If you want to play the first one, I can get you the link to the third one here.
There was a question raised about Mr. Hoover's theory of 1959 that Oswald may have been an impositor. Well, I personally was not familiar with that attitude of Mr. Hoover. That in all honesty, I don't think that attitude on his part would have significantly changed the course of our investigation or the conclusions of the commission. You also raised the question as to the connection or possible involvement of the underworld in any assassination plot. I would like to state this for the record. I do not believe that if there was any association between some CIA officers and members of the underworld, that would have changed the conclusion of the Warren Commission. However, had the Warren Commission known of any assassination plots directed against Castro, this might have affected the extent of the commission inquiry. In other words, if we had known of these assassination plans or attempts by an agency of the federal government, it certainly would have required that the commission extend its inquiry into those kind of operations by an agency of the federal government. But from what I have known of those plots, or what I've read or heard, I don't think they in and of themselves would have changed the conclusions of the commission.
Well, Don, what we just hearing, as I interpret it, is Gerald Ford responding to the observation that J. Edgar Hoover had reported, and he actually sent out a memorandum to all of his agents in charge across the country that someone was in Mexico City impersonating Lee Harvey Oswald. We have, of course, copies of the photographs of the man. He looks nothing like Lee Oswald. There was an audio recording. It wasn't Lee Oswald's voice. Hoover was aware of it. And it seems to me that if all you knew about the assassination, if the only fact you knew was that someone was impersonating Lee Oswald in Mexico City, you would on that basis alone be forced to conclude it had been a conspiracy.
How you guys doing?
Larry, great. Did you hear my last comment? I don't know
Yes,
if you
I
heard
did.
the whole Gerald. Go ahead and comment.
On the Mexico City?
Yeah.
It was that we played a clip about Gerald Ford talking about the Hoover memo where somebody was impersonating Oswald.
Right. Well, I didn't hear I just joined and I didn't hear the tape. But as far as Mexico City is concerned, my personal belief is that it never happened. I don't know.
Larry, back up. Somebody was down there impersonating Oswald. What you're saying when you say it didn't happen, you mean you don't think Lee went to Mexico City. You're not saying there wasn't someone there who was photographed and whose voice was recorded who was impersonating him. Now, what you didn't hear in the Gerald Ford comments was he saying, even if we had that information, it wouldn't have made any difference to our research. He's basically suggesting it was irrelevant, which of course is an absurd proposition, because I, on the contrary, am asserting that if that were all you knew about the assassination, you would understand it had been a conspiracy all by itself.
Right. Well, I did research on the Mexico City portion of the HSCA investigation where Kenneth Bruton and this other investigator by the name of Blackmer, they went down to interview Boris and Ann Tarasov. These were Russian interpreters at the U.S. Embassy. And they were interviewed, and this was a document that's almost 100 pages long. It wasn't declassified until after the ARRB. And the Tarasovs were scared to death even as late as 1976. And Bruton interviewed this couple at length. They were Russian language translators. And neither of them, after listening and reading the transcripts of the supposed Oswald contacts with the embassy there, the Russian embassy, neither of them could ascertain that Lee Oswald, the voice in those tapes was Lee Oswald. So that portion of the HSCA investigation uncovered that, and this was not revealed until well into the 90s. So that's I just wanted to throw that out there, so in case you guys want to comment on that. It never happened. As far as now, impersonation, yes, absolutely. And there was
right. We want to be crystal clear that you're not denying that someone was there impersonating Lee Oswald. That did happen. But you're suggesting, based on your research, that Lee Oswald did not travel to Mexico City, which has long been my opinion as well. Don.
Well, and when the HSCA, this Kenneth Bruton was sent there by Richard Sprague, the first director of the HSCA, and this trip happened to happened. Right after the David Atlee Phillips interview, the very next day, these two guys hopped on a plane and they went down to Mexico City. In fact, this couple that I was just referring to, Boris and Ann Tarasov, they were living in Guadalajara, but they were still in Mexico. And at the time when they went in to interview them to verify if they could ascertain that Lee Oswald was on those tapes, they categorically denied that Lee Oswald was on those tapes. So he was definitely being impersonated.
Don.
Yeah, okay, if Lee Oswald was just a lone nut, why was somebody impersonating him? And why was the director of the FBI sending out memos asking who's impersonating Oswald?
Right. Reporting that someone has been impersonating Oswald. They tried to cover it up, but copies of that have survived. And Larry, did you have access to one of those copies of the Hoover memo about someone impersonating Lee?
Yeah, I've come across it. Yes. I don't have it on hand right now, but yes, I've come across it. Yeah.
Don,
tell us more then.
Okay, yeah, I've seen a couple copies on the internet, but they're hard to read. They weren't. Time wasn't very kind to the paper, so it was kind of difficult to read the whole original.
Well, they were teletypes, and it's roughly of the quality of a fax, and how a fax can deteriorate across time.
Yeah, a 50-year-old fax is not the most legible. So I have seen it, and Deloach is the guy that Ford was talking about. Deloach was the guy that Ford.
Cartha Deloach, yes.
Deke, I think he went by Deke.
That was his nickname, Deke.
Yeah, he died a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he wasn't one of those like William Sullivan who was taken out to keep their mouths shut. He was apparently very much involved in the cover-up. And they feared that William Sullivan, who had been number 3 in the agency, was going to spill some beans. So he took him out in a hunting accident, claiming that someone mistook him for a deer.
Well, the Lopez report, which was also declassified in the 90s, is very thorough and very meticulous piece of work. And to this day, Ed Lopez never found any evidence of Lee Oswald having visited Mexico City.
Well, right. The FBI had searched his apartment and his home repeatedly, and it was only after Priscilla McMillan Johnson went to babysit Marina that she remarkably discovered the bus ticket stubs that showed that Lee actually had made the trip. I mean, it was about as ridiculous as it gets. It's like studying the Mannlicher Carcano and finding there are no prints on it, but after the FBI make a visit to the mortuary, and put his print on the right. Then they discover where Goody, who is the mortician, said he had a terrible time getting the ink off of the hand of the deceased after their visit. I mean, this is all so blatant, in retrospect. It's so amateurish.
Yeah.
If it was a lone nut guy, why all the trouble here? Why go to the trouble to fake the palm print on the rifle or get it after he's dead? I mean, come on. And then with this memo, how is it, that would be like the director of the FBI today saying, hey, somebody's impersonating Fox. Well, why the hell would you impersonate me? If it makes no sense at all. Absolutely none. If Lee was not an intelligence asset from the get-go, and anybody that went to Russia and then came back in the Cold War, I mean, come on. And the State Department loans him money and that I don't think he ever had to pay back. I mean, come on. It's right there. Oswald, at very least, had to be a low-level intelligence operative.
We know that Hoover was shooting off memos since 1959 that somebody was using Oswald's passport, and identity. So that's very well established.
Absolutely. Don, why don't you fill us in more about what you and Gary had planned for this evening, where Gary has been unable to make contact? Gary, you're your friend.
With my new webcam. There you are, Jim.
All right. Now, where are you, Gary? Oh, there you are. There you are. There you are.
I didn't even know the webcam was connected. I didn't have the internet, so I guess I'm just going to stick it up here. And here I am.
Yeah.
Well, now we're all here. Let us bring you up to date on what we have done in your absence, which is play the first Gerald Ford tape where he's attempting to explain that Hoover, if Hoover had a memorandum reporting that someone had been impersonating Lee Oswald in Mexico City, it would have made no difference to the investigation that they had conducted, which is, of course, simply ridiculous as it gets. But what else?
Actually, well, in this case, it's true. It was not going to make any difference.
Yeah. Because it was not an evidence-based inquiry.
Exactly. Yeah. So the conclusions weren't going to change no matter what. So it wouldn't have mattered. Ford told the truth there.
Gary, give us your overview, what you had in mind for tonight before we had the technical glitches of non-connection.
All right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about Gary Mack. I know it's a little uncomfortable to talk about the people that have passed on. We also wanted to finish up with Henry Kissinger. Don and I finished the show. It's been about 3 weeks, so I'm a little bit rusty on what we were going to talk about. And then we were going to talk about Ford, play the 3 Ford clips.
Okay, yep. So can you get us on track then? Go ahead, take over.
So we played the first Ford clip, and that was where Ford was talking about the Hoover memo.
Do you want to reverse the order, Gary, and do another Ford clip and then switch back to what you would have done in the beginning?
Yeah, I got the first Ford clip, then let's go on with this. We can go ahead and do
play. No, Gary, we already played the first one, so go to the second one.
Let's go to number 2.
Go to number 2. Yep.
Thank you, Counsel. At this point, the chair will recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Devine, for such time as he may consume, after which the committee will operate under the 5-minute rule. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, we welcome you here this morning, and we appreciate it. It must be a bit difficult after 14-plus years to recall everything that occurred on this commission, particularly due to the vast responsibilities that were put upon you as both Vice President and President of the United States during the intervening time. With all due deference to the other members of the Warren Commission that are present, you did attain probably the reputation of being the most conscientious member of the commission, having attended more meetings and interviewing more witnesses than anyone else on the commission at that time. In that connection, Mr. Chairman, would Mrs. Burning make available to the President JFK Exhibits 441 and 442?
Clerk Elizabeth Burning has done some exhibits to the President.
Mr. President, I think you have had an opportunity to, on a previous occasion, review these 2 memorandums, one of which is dated December 12, 1963, the other December 17, 1963, both memorandums being authored by the Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Mr. Cartha DeLoach. And I would like to ask you if these memorandum, if you had a chance to review them, accurately, or if they are accurate with respect to the conversations with you, and what, if any, the relationship you had with the FBI during the operation of the Warren Commission.
Congressman Devine, I appreciate the opportunity to respond to the 2 memorandums from Mr. DeLoach, one of December 12, 1963, and one of December 17, 1963. And if the committee will permit, I will read a prepared statement because I wish to be very accurate in this regard. During my service in the Congress from January 3, 1949 until appointed to the Warren Commission, I had an excellent relationship with the FBI. It was not on a frequent basis. I barely knew J. Edgar Hoover, but like most Americans, had great respect for him and the Bureau. Over that period, I became reasonably well acquainted with Mr. Lou Nichols, who was Mr. DeLoach's predecessor. Mr. Nichols had a long-standing friendship with 8 or 9 editors of Booth newspapers in Michigan, including the Grand Rapids Press, which was the Booth paper in my hometown. I met with Mr. DeLoach through Mr. Nichols. And when Mr. Nichols retired, and whenever I had a congressional matter involving the FBI, I would contact Mr. DeLoach. These were contacts well before my appointment to the Warren Commission. After my appointment to the Commission, and following several of the Commission's organizational meetings, I was disturbed that the chairman, in selecting a general counsel for the staff, appeared to be moving in the direction of a one-man commission. My views were shared by several other members of the Commission. The problem was resolved by an agreement that all top staff appointments would be approved by the Commission as a whole. In my December 12, 1963 discussion with Mr. DeLoach in my office, I told him of this temporary internal conflict with the Commission. Within the Commission, I should say. In that same meeting with Mr. DeLoach, we discussed several other matters, including involving possible decisions of the Commission. And I related a visit to my office by Mr. John McCone, who was then director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Mr. DeLoach gave me additional information on the matter discussed by Mr. McCone. On December 17, 1963, I again met with Mr. DeLoach in my office, and the subjects discussed are set forth in the copy of the memo from Mr. DeLoach to Mr. Moore. In reference to these meetings with Mr. DeLoach and any questions relating to my relationship as a commission member with the FBI, I will state the following. 1, I do not have any memoranda which shows that after December 19, 1963, I had any contact with Mr. DeLoach, and I know of no other memoranda from any source. 2, the 2 contacts with Mr. DeLoach, which were prior to December 20th, were made during the organizational period of the Commission, and before any investigations or hearings were undertaken by the Commission. Number 3, to my best recollection, the DeLoach memos appear to be accurate, but the relationship mentioned by Mr. DeLoach did not continue during the investigation period of the Commission.
All right, Don, you want to be the first to comment on that one?
Sure. Yeah. I found a WashingtonPost.com article talking about this DeLoach memo, and it says December 1963 memo recounts that Ford, then a Republican congressman from Michigan, told FBI Assistant Director Cartha D. Deke DeLoach that 2 members of the 7-person commission remained unconvinced that Kennedy had been shot from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. In addition, 3 commission members failed to understand, quote unquote, the trajectory of the slugs, Ford said. Ford told DeLoach that the commission discussions would continue and reassured him that those minority points of view on the commission, quote, of course would represent no problem, unquote. One internal FBI memo shows. The memo does not name the members involved and does not elaborate on what Ford meant by no problem.
I think it was Richard Rogers, a senator, and Hale Boggs, a representative, who were the most reluctant. John Sherman Cooper also, I think, was a skeptic. And of course, there's good reason to question the trajectory because we have this absurd impossibility called the magic bullet, which turns out not only to be false and provably false, but not even anatomically possible. because the trajectory would involve interdicting cervical vertebrae, which would have deflected, which Arlen Specter had skillfully suppressed by asking the physicians not what they observed and what they inferred from what they have observed, but if we assume the bullet entered here at the back of the base of the neck, passed through the neck without hitting any bony structures, and came out here, would that be consistent with describing this wound in the throat as a wound of exit? To which, for example, Malcolm Perry, who'd actually performed a simple tracheostomy in the wound and described it 3 times during the Parkland press conference held after the declaration or announcement of JFK's death to the press assembled, that it was a wound of entry, that the bullet coming was at him. He confirmed Specter's answer, which of course was trivial, yes, but that he was not in the position to vouch for or verify the assumptions he'd been asked to make, which of course were preposterous. So, I mean, Specter used a hypothetical question that begged the issue of what actually happened by postulating a scenario for which there was, in fact, a total lack of evidence. In fact, the evidence we had from the shirt, the jacket, the autopsy report, and so forth, the FBI diagram, and all that, even the FBI's, the Secret Service reenactment, all contradicted what Specter was saying there and what the report was maintaining.
Yeah, and didn't Ford have that back wound moved up, what, 5 inches?
Yes, it was Gerald Ford who had the wound to the redescribed from the upper back, which was already an exaggeration since it was 5.5 inches below the collar, just the right of the spinal column, to the base of the back of the neck. In order to make it more plausible, it was Gerald Ford who performed that semantic feat.
All right, do you believe that Gerald Ford believed what he was saying? Or he was, yeah, do you believe that Gerald Ford was actually, I've had Professor Norwood say that he truly believed that Gerald Ford believed the commission and everything that he was saying.
Well, I have a lot of respect.
I know towards the end he was a complete sellout. You believe in the beginning?
Yes, I believe that's why they put him on there in the first place.
He was Edgar's man on the commission. There's no doubt he was a stooge for the director of the FBI. So James, I think, is being a tad naive here in what he's suggesting.
Right.
I mean, look at that Warren Commission. They were all ringers. I mean, come on. You had Dulles. I mean, Kennedy fired the man. Now we're bringing him back to investigate his death. I mean, Ford would not have been on that corrupt body had he not been a stooge already. There's no way they would have put him in there.
Yeah, Alan Dulles and Gerald Ford are the two.
Hale Boggs from my state.
Well, Boggs might have been like the token guy with integrity. I guess maybe they had to have one or two.
Right. You got to be careful on those hunting trips to Alaska.
I think Richard Rogers and John Sherman Cooper were men of great integrity, and Hale Boggs as well. But between Alan Dulles and Gerald Ford and the Chief Justice having been essentially directed by the president to find Oswald as the lone assassin, they were boxed in. And notice, while they wanted to have a minority report expressing their dissent, they were told that would happen. But in fact, it did not. Deliberately, their dissents were excluded from publication.
Yeah, just like the Warren Commission, there's been a lot of reports of people having their testimony changed by the Warren Commission, and it's not surprisingly that they lied to those guys, saying their views weren't going to get published.
Larry, would you like to add your thoughts about the role of the various members of the commission and whether they were complicit in the cover-up or just simply strung along?
Absolutely. Boggs and Cooper, not very many people know about this, refused to sign the Warren Commission as it came out because of the magic bullet theory. And another tidbit that not very many people know about is that Cooper continued up until the day that he died, I believe in 1972, to correspond with Harold Weisberg and to make sure he kept encouraging Weisberg to continue to investigate and to keep bringing out all these freedom of information request lawsuits that he had against the government for documents. And up until the day that he died, he never believed the Warren Commission, and he secretly helped Harold Weisberg in a lot of his research.
Well, Harold was doing a lot of brilliant work. Even in the second whitewash, he had at the back, his own reflections on the Elgin Six, and that, in fact, it was obvious to him that was not Billy Lovelady, that was Lee Oswald. So, in my opinion, he was among the most astute of all of the first-generation students of the assassination.
Oh, yeah. And another thing that I wanted to add about Gerald Ford, it's very well known that he made money off of Lee Oswald's diary, and he put it out there. I mean, there's something that is extraordinary when you come to think of it.
Yes. He published a book that included classified information that was a violation of the law at the time, so they changed the law to allow him not to be technically in violation. But, I mean, he had already committed the law as it stood at the time, and you can't properly revise these things retroactively. So I mean, he was just given leeway here for having committed an offense under the law.
Yeah, portrait of an assassin.
Gary, it's great to have you back. We're missing you, my friend. Listen, we have like 15 minutes left, although Chance, I'm sure, will let us carry over another 5. Do you want to play one of these other clips?
Yeah, there's one more clip. Yeah, play number 3.
Okay.
Here we go. All right.
On Sunday, the 7th of June of 1964, Mr. President, you and I think Chief Justice Warren went to Dallas and had an interview with Jack Ruby. Do you recall that situation?
I recall it vividly, Mr. Devine.
I further recall that during this conversation, Mr. Ruby said as follows, and this appears on page 194 of the transcript. Gentlemen, if you want to hear any further testimony, you will have to get me to Washington soon, because it has something to do with you, Chief Warren. Do I sound sober enough to tell you this, Chief Justice Warren? Yes, go right ahead. Mr. Ruby, I want to tell the truth, and I can't tell it here. Does that make sense to you? I would ask you, Mr. President, why was Ruby not taken to Washington for further questioning as he requested? First, the
Chief Justice, the chairman, and myself, along thoroughly interrogated Jack Ruby in Dallas on that Sunday afternoon. As I recall, the interrogation went 3 or 4 hours. We believe that we had fully probed from him all of the information that he had available. And the Chief Justice, the chairman, and I reported back to the other members of the commission the interrogation that we had of Jack Ruby, and the other members of the commission had full access, of course, to the transcript. It's my best recollection that the other members of the commission agreed with the Chief Justice and myself that it was not necessary to bring Ruby from Dallas to Washington and to go through another interrogation of him in the nation's capital. Secondly, as the transcript indicates, Jack Ruby did request a polygraph examination. At his request, that was given, and the commission and the staff of the commission had the benefit of that polygraph and that interrogation. So when you brought it all together, the interrogation by the chairman and myself and the staff, plus the polygraph, it did not seem necessary to bring Jack Ruby down to Washington for further investigation or interrogation.
Well, in other words, it was the feeling of the commissioner, at least a majority of them, that no meaningful purpose would be served by transporting him from Dallas to Washington.
That is correct, sir.
Wow, one of the most important witnesses in the assassination.
Yeah. No useful purpose other than keeping him alive so he could testify.
And they got everything in the office. Wow. And now that we've looked into Jack Ruby's address book, there's so many clues. And he was ready to spill the beans, I believe. I think he had a heart. I think he really felt remorse. But then again, man, that Ford was just too much. Just, man.
Larry, would you like to add your thoughts about this?
Well, I was impressed the way that Jim Garrison, one of our great American heroes, dealt with that because, as we all know, Jim Garrison really uncovered the plot in New Orleans, and he knew right from the beginning, that this was a national security state apparatus who had, taken out the president of the United States. And Jack Ruby was such an important witness, and it was just basic to the whole scheme.
Don, you want to add to it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Jack Ruby, a real name Rubenstein, the man that shot the patsy in the basement of the Dallas police station, and his jail cell was just a few blocks from the Dallas police station. I think he was being held in the county facility, was he not? And so if that guy tells you that, hey, I'm a few blocks away from the scene of the crime, I can't tell you the truth here, you should take me to Washington. Now, if it was on the up and up, wouldn't you just fork out a few bucks to put the guy on a plane and take him to DC? I mean, we're talking about the murder of the murderer, the alleged murderer, the president of the United States.
Well, Lyndon, I'm sure, was following this intensely and was, manipulating the situation behind the scenes. And obviously they wanted Ruby to be taken out in Dallas. They didn't want to move him. They certainly didn't want to bring him to Washington, D.C. So, they waited to make the transfer until Jack Ruby was in place. People say, well, how could he have, since they were late in making the transfer, been there at the right time? And the fact is that they waited until he was there to bring Lee out. I mean, some of these things are just simple, so very simple to understand once you appreciate the dimensions of the conspiracy and how many aspects of it were under complete control.
Yeah, and Ruby did not walk down the ramp either. He came through the Dallas police station. And once he was in position, you can hear, if you watch the film of that, you can hear a horn honking in the background, and then things start moving, and then Oswald gets shot.
The horn honk saying that's like saying, okay, scene, action.
Yep, gentlemen, start your engines. Yep, here we go.
Well, yeah, and I want to add to that Captain Fritz was walking right in front of Lee Oswald, and at that same time that the horn is honked, he separates and he walks forward, and he walks to his right, opening the front shot, for Ruby, so right there you could see that Fritz was in on it as well.
That's a very good point, Larry. There's a brand new book by the former chief psychiatrist for the FBI, Alan J. Solarian, who's also a painter, which is entitled JFK, The Magnificent Journey, which you can now obtain on Amazon or CreateSpace. It's just loaded with beautiful paintings that he has made, where he makes a specific point that Fritz was clearly involved in it because he didn't react at all. He didn't look back. He showed no surprise. He wasn't startled at all. That's right. When Jack Ruby steps out to shoot Lee Oswald. And I think that Alan's completely right. By the way, this book is really quite fascinating because it offers insights from a perspective that, to my knowledge, no one else has ever provided, that of a professional psychiatrist who has a great deal of experience in law enforcement.
Absolutely. Anybody who sees the actions of Captain Fritz right away knows that he knew that that shot was going to go off, because had he not known, he would have been startled, and he's not even startled. He doesn't even flinch at all. So it's pretty obvious.
I agree completely. That's a nice point Alan makes in this brand new book. Gary, did you want to add some more thoughts? Gary may be frozen. Don, can you say more?
Yeah, the whole thing of how, just on its face, how does a guy get a gun, just a few feet away from the alleged murderer of the president of the United States? How is that allowed to happen in the basement of the Dallas police station? I mean, that's pretty
unless it's a setup.
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, could you imagine even in '63 walking into a police station basement with a gun? I mean, come on. There's no way that can happen. And then shooting the suspect like that. I mean, those things. Well, I mean, look at all the failures you had in Dallas. I mean, presidential protection completely broken down.
Yeah, but that was on purpose, though.
And so was the Oswald. I mean, come on. There's no way that a suspect like that should be shot.
You're saying what would be breakdowns had this been a legitimate rather than a scenario rather than a scene that was set up where we have more than 15 indications of Secret Service complicity in setting them up to be taken out?
Yeah, but this is what really went wrong. This is something that really did not go according to plan. They didn't expect to deal with Oswald. They thought it would be all over. They have a dead policeman. We had to shoot him. Didn't have any choice. And that's where I think that's the biggest thing that went wrong for them in the whole thing.
Well, just a comment on that. My opinion has long been that when Marion Baker confronted Lee in the lunchroom, he was supposed to shoot him dead right there on the scene. And it was only because Roy Truly happened to be there that Baker hesitated and didn't follow through.
I've heard scenarios where he was supposed to get shot at the Texas Theater. He wasn't supposed to.
Oh, yeah, that was a fallback, right? Then he was going to be taken out at the Texas Theater, but first at the book depository, then at the Texas Theater. I agree. Larry, you want to add more?
Yeah, I was going to mention that what Don just said, obviously at the Texas Theater, we have spoken about this before, where Bill Alexander was waiting in the back alley, with his gun drawn, just in case he decided to make a break for it, out of the emergency exit, which goes out to the alley, which over at the Texas Theater is actually sideways there. But yeah, they had many opportunities to take him out, and they didn't, and that's probably the reason why this whole thing happened with Jack Ruby 2 days later. He was forced to do it.
Yeah, there was a firing squad behind the theater, from what I understand, just waiting for him to run out the back. That's what I always was understanding, that they expected him to run out the back.
Oh, that's been documented. There's a lot of witnesses that saw that little meeting back there.
That things went terribly wrong when they didn't shoot him right there in the theater, with every reason to, because there was a police officer that he had just killed.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, y'all want to talk about Gary Mack a little bit before we close out?
Yeah. Let's take the rest of the time, say total of 10 minutes to talk about Gary Mack.
All right. Well, I guess the main thing about Gary Mack is that you understood. So we sided the opposition, and he made it very clear. Now, the problem I have with some of our researchers, they're attempting to say that they're bringing us the truth when, in other words, I guess I'm talking about Robert Groden. I have more respect for Gary Mack than Robert Groden, because at least he's straight up with you, I guess would be a way to put it. So what do y'all think about that?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Yeah, I would say Groden's a little more insidious. But let's talk about Gary Mack. I just found this out a couple of weeks ago, just doing a little search on Gary Mack, doing some basic biographical stuff. He was born in Oak Park, Illinois. Mack was given the name Lawrence Allen Dunkel. That was his real name. He would, during his days as a disc jockey, he changed his name to Gary Mack at the request of a radio station program man who felt it would be catchier.
Then Dunkel?
Yeah, Dunkel. Yeah, I guess,
That my name isn't Dunkel.
So Mack wasn't his real name. He's survived by a wife, a sister. You can read that. That's on the DallasNews.com. Now, people like Gerald Posner and let's see, some other folks. I think
Vince Bugliosi.
Yeah, Ainsworth. They all sing the praises of Gary Mack. Yeah,
He's not a big one though. What's it? The one? Doggone it! The biggest shield of them all. The Professor
McAdams.
McAdams. Yeah.
Right. That's another.
Larry.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to give a little bit more background on Gary. Gary in the 70s was a very close collaborator of Penn Jones Jr. Penn Jones Jr. used to put out this periodical, this journal called the Continuing Inquiry, and it went on, from the mid 70s to probably the early 80s. And Gary did a lot of early research and a lot of articles for that journal, and he did, as we all know, a lot of the early work with the Dictabelt, where the four shots that were heard, and that Dictabelt, the recording was taken up later on by the HSCA, which later on brought out the conclusion that there had been a shot from the grassy knoll. But Gary did a lot of research on that, and then in the early 80s, he sort of had like a falling out with Penn Jones. And he started his own journal, his own periodical called Cover-Ups. And in this journal, which he ran for about 3 or 4 years himself, he was the editor. And he did a lot of, so many articles on JFK research, and mostly conspiracy oriented. And so when you read a lot of these articles, it really takes you back, to those days, and along with White.
Jack White. Yeah, in collaboration with Jack White, working on the Mormon, Gary Mack, and he identified Badgeman in that photograph.
That's right. Him and Jack White did a lot of work. Both of them being in Dallas. And they had access to a lot of witnesses. So they were privy to a lot of inside information there in Dallas for a long time. So that's why when Gary Mack turned to the dark side, so to speak, it was very,
unsettling.
Yes, and you knew Jack White. Jim,
yes, we were close collaborators.
What was Jack's reaction when Gary did that?
He was disappointment is a weak word here to characterize. He was just dismayed, completely dismayed.
Yeah, because Jack White did a lot of pioneering research himself on the photographic record. In fact, I know for a fact that he was attacked one time and he was stabbed.
Oh, yeah.
Stabbed.
Right, there was a naked man in his bedroom who was trying to stab him to death, and of course he was naked so he could get in the shower and wash off any blood and make sure he didn't leave any trace out. It was a professional hit, but Jack survived it, thank God.
Yeah. So it just goes to show that, all this work that Jack and Gary did in the 80s, perhaps that incident with Jack might have been a shot across the bow to put Gary, so to speak, in line, to say, hey, Gary, this is it for you. You got to, you're working for us now.
But, Larry, given that background, given that he'd even run, a publication called Cover Up, he had to know so much more. He had to know that what he was covering up himself was, what he was doing himself was a cover up of the evidence of conspiracy in the death of JFK.
Well, in the early days, he did a lot of really, really excellent work. It was later on, like as we were just discussing here, that he sort of turned to the dark side.
With pay.
Yeah, well, yeah, right here in the Dallas News, it says, Mack, who once influenced a congressional inquiry on the JFK assassination, joined the museum in 1994 after a career in radio and television. He had long professed a belief, or at least a suspicion, that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone in killing the president. So he never completely left the conspiracy side, but
yeah, he said something like, well, when I go home and I'm by myself, I have my own thoughts, but when I'm here at work, I more or less have to toe the company line.
He was paid big bucks to be the front man.
200,000.
Yeah, $200,000 a year.
I'll take it. Well, no, I wouldn't. But boy.
Yeah, but I really believe that the incident with Jack White was a warning, Jim,
That's very, very interesting, Larry. It hadn't crossed my mind before. I think you may very well be right.
Absolutely.
And of course, I mean, if Jack had been killed, how much more powerful a message that would have sent.
Absolutely, absolutely. But still, they let him live, so he could talk about it and tell people about it. So, it's always in the back of one's mind, because it could have happened. It could have been that way. So, just another JFK trivia, I guess.
Don, you want to say a few more words here before we tie it up?
Yeah, I first came across Gary Mack, on The Men Who Killed Kennedy. I think that's where a lot of people saw him, first in the public eye. I thought he did great work with Jack White, as people had mentioned. And so he did turn to the dark side, and he even kind of admitted that that's what people said he did. So he didn't.
Yeah, I remember in Dallas.
Oh, he didn't totally deny that was going on. So, well, Gary Mack, I guess, is he the devil? Probably not, but he's certainly a mixed bag. And, anything, especially after he started working at the 6th floor, you knew he was towing the company line.
Well, it's very clear cut. He sold out. I mean, there's nothing
no
ambiguous about it at all. I mean, he did very good work until a certain point, and then he sold out.
Then he sold out, yeah.
And
he didn't totally
lied. I mean,
yeah, he did lie. But he didn't totally disown the conspiracy side, though. He did.
Yeah, but listen, when David Manick and I went down to Dallas to test Jack White's hypothesis that there was a line of sight in the Mormon that enabled us to identify where Mary Mormon had been standing, which established that she'd been in the street as she had claimed. David Lifton wrote an appendix. It's entitled Mormon in the Street Revisited. You can find it online. And Lifton's appendix was utterly fascinating. He talked about watching how they were filming Mary, and she repeatedly started to say how she stepped into the street and how Gary stopped her again and again and again. Every time Mary wanted to say she stepped into the street, he stopped her. And finally, they did a take where Mary didn't do that. And he said, we'll use that. And as Lifton observes, he's not quite sure what this is, but it certainly doesn't qualify as historical research.
Well, that's our guy. Well, and so I would say, rest in peace, Gary Mack, or Larry Dunkel, as it were. 68, died of an aggressive form of cancer. He was, even though he was working for the other side, it's like you battle these people enough, it's almost like they're part of the family, So when one of them dies, it's not like we're dancing on his grave over here,
Larry, a final word on Gary Mack, Larry.
Yeah, well, what crossed my mind, Jim, was who's going to be the new generation of
Jill.
Yeah, right. Like conspiracy theorists, or whatever. Once the guys like Mack and McAdams and those people are gone, so you never know who's going to pop out,
And Gary, last but not least, but for the technical glitches, you would have been running this hour. Please give us your final thoughts about Gary Mack.
But as far as Gary Mack, he's our clearest example of a sellout. I mean, it's black and white, and you can almost go down to the date that it happened as far as he's concerned. So rest in peace, Gary Mack. And we lost a couple of easy targets. So at least he was an easy target along with Bugliosi. And I guess McAdams is fallen from grace, I guess. I understand he got in trouble of some sort or was fired from his job. I'm not sure of the story, but
yeah, he had to run in with a teaching assistant that was pretty ugly. So yeah,
so what we're going to do is start aiming at the not so easy targets, which we do all the time. So it's time for a couple of researcher alerts in the future, I believe.
Well, this is Jim Fetzer thanking Gary King, Larry Rivera, Don Fox for being here, and all of you for listening.